invite you to turn to page 158 as a way to shift toward sermon. These are the words we will be chanting later after the blowing of the shofar, which in Hebrew translate to, "May the words of our lips be pleasing to you, exalted God, who listens, discerns, considers, and attends to the sound of our shofar blast. Lovingly accept our prayerful offering that proclaims your sovereignty." Hal Hurwitz with Rabbi Steve Einstein to lead us.
Rosh tzifatenu yerav lefanecha el ram v'nisa. Rosh tzifatenu yerav lefanecha el ram v'nisa. Mevinu mazin mabitu makshiv lekol tekiyatenu. U'tekabel berachamim uvratzon seder malchuyotenu.
So when we hear the sound of the shofar, the word itself means l'shaper, to improve. When we hear those blasts of the shofar as we shared yesterday, we are to turn inward, to examine ourselves. I learned long ago from somebody wise in our midst that in seeking change, one needs to pick only one focus at a time. And so likewise, on this day of Rosh Hashanah, we are called in hearing the shofar, l'shaper, to improve, to find one quality, just one at a time, that you see within yourself as something you would want to improve on within yourself. Because ultimately, how we live in the world results from our inner reflexes, our habits, and discerning what is the nature of those habits is the work of the sounding of the shofar, to be shaken enough to open our hearts and to peer within. Today, I want to focus on that topic of inner qualities. In the Torah, we are guided by how to live by Moshe Rabbeinu. The rabbis call Moses our teacher. They call him, they who are teachers, the rabbis, by their highest compliment, that he is a teacher, the teacher of teachers. They don't refer to him as the mighty leader, as the powerful one, or as the liberator. Traditionally, Moses is called our teacher. And he teaches by how he lived his life. For ultimately, more than what we say to our children, what influences them is what they see us do. And more than all of Moses' words, it's precisely what he does in difficult moments that defines who he is. There is only one adjective used in the entire Torah to describe Moses. We're not told what he looked like. None of those adjectives deal with, was he tall? Was he redheaded? Did he have a long beard? We don't know about his physical appearance other than the fact that he had to wear a mask. For most of his life, he had to wear a mask. because the Torah will record that when he came down from Mount Sinai encountering God, there was a light of emanation from his face, Kirnaim. And when he was in normal life, he had to wear a mask. But that's not the adjective that describes him. That's the only comment on his physical appearance. Do you know what the only adjective used by the Torah to describe Moses is? Humble. Anav. V'ha'ish Moshe, Bamidbar Yud Bet, chapter 12. V'ha'ish Moshe haya anav ma'od. And that man Moses, he was very anav. Mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama. From any human, from any earthling on the face of the earth. That's the only adjective used to describe Moshe. He was anav, very anav. What is anav? Often translated as humble. Humility defines him. But to understand how it defines him, I'm going to share 3 stories about him. But before I do, a comment on from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who is the former chief rabbi of England, on this topic. How virtues change. Moses, the greatest hero of Jewish tradition, is described by the Bible as, quote, a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. By today's standards, he was clearly wrongly advised. He should have hired an agent, sharpened up his image, let slip some calculated indiscretions about his conversations with the Almighty, and sold his story to the press for a 6-figure sum. With any luck, he might have landed up with his own television chat show, dispensing wisdom to those willing to bare their soul to the watching millions. He would have had his 15 minutes of fame. Instead, he had to settle for the lesser consolation of 3,000 years of moral influence. And then he will continue. Humility then is more than just a virtue. It is a form of perception, a language in which the I is silent so that I can hear the thou. The unspoken call beneath human speech, the divine whisper within all that moves, the voice of otherness that calls me to redeem its loneliness with a touch of love. Humility is what opens us to the world. When we speak of Moses as Rabbeinu, all the more on this, the day of Shofar, the focus is on ourselves. It's on our humility, individually in this room, that is my focus. That verse that I just quoted is verse 3, chapter 12 in Bamidbar. Verse 1 and 2 gives it a context that helps us understand what is humility. The story begins that Moses has 2 siblings, Aaron and Miriam. And as the chapter opens, they're having a conversation with each other. And Miriam says, "Can you believe our brother, the way he treats his wife? After all," in verse 2, "God talks to us as well." Now, it's not clear what Moses is doing that they are gossiping about. The Midrash Sifrei comments that what Miriam is complaining about is that Moses is ignoring her sister-in-law. That Moses is acting so holy, he's no longer engaged with his wife, which is why verse 2 says, God talks to us as well. And then it says, and Moses was the most humble of man. And then God speaks. And God says to Miriam and Aaron, don't you know that when I speak to Moses, I speak to him unlike anybody else that I speak to? I speak to him face to face, not in elusive images. And then Miriam is punished with the punishment for gossip, for speaking ill of somebody, which is leprosy. And Aaron then comes to Moses and says, Moses, you got to pray to God. You got to do something. Miriam has broken out in blotches. It's as if her skin is dead. And Moses recites 5 words. Ana elna rafana la. God, please heal her, please. And the leprosy is healed. And so what is the first quality of humility? It's the ability to forgive. In this case, Moses could feel slighted, that no less than his brother and sister are gossiping against him about his leadership, about his being holy. But when there's a need to respond, he does what's right. A fundraiser, Tom Tavella, said something to me years ago that made a big impression on me. He said, no matter what somebody does to you, do what's right. And that's what Moses does. We don't know how he felt, how he might have felt hurt. But when there was a need to do something, he acted and did what was right. And that is the quality here of forgiveness, that he was able to overlook how he might have been slighted and pray on her behalf. And so what is humility? It's the ability to do what is right, regardless of what others have done to you, and to forgive in the context of doing what's right. In the Jewish tradition, on this day of judgment, forgiveness does not necessarily mean, in relation to other people, that it's okay. Forgiveness does not mean, in the Jewish tradition, necessarily turning the cheek. Again, I quote my mother, as a Holocaust survivor, to forgive does not mean to forget. There are some people that are best kept at arm's length because they are hurtful. To forgive them means to do what's right in their presence, regardless, to act from a higher place. It does not necessarily mean to forget. It does not mean to let down the guard, that there may indeed be danger. But Moses is our teacher, and in his case, with his brother and his sister, he's not only able to pray for her, but he's able to hear his brother asking for the prayer. And that's all the more remarkable. Sadly, the breaks in relationships that I see that still bewilder me are between family members over small hurts, because small hurts get magnified by those that you trust. Happiness is expectations met, and precisely those people who you have an expectation to love you, to be kind, to see the goodness in you, when they point out what's wrong with you, that can be the most painful of all comments, which segues into the second story of Moses. Moses is the leader. He's a new leader. He's just led the people out from Egypt, no small task of leadership, in which God brought miracles to enable those gates literally the waters to part so that they could reach freedom. And the Torah then recounts that this relatively inexperienced leader is on his feet from early in the morning till late at night, judging the people. This is before Sinai, giving them guidance on how to get along. His father-in-law, Jethro, Chotno, HaKohen Midian, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, watches Moses on his feet with people waiting for their audience. And he is an experienced leader. And he says to Moses, he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm answering judgments and helping the people." And then his father-in-law says, "Moses, you're going to burn out. You can't, and your people are going to burn out. You can't be on your feet from early in the morning till late at night doing it all yourself. What you need to do is create a hierarchy of judges, and they'll bring you only the toughest questions, but you need to let go of some of that power and distribute it among others." Now you can imagine how you might feel as a young leader who's freed the people from the mighty hand of Pharaoh. You might feel like you're an important leader. And Moses, in his humility, and Moses, in his greatness, do you know what he does? Do you know what he says to his father-in-law? "Good idea." And he does it. That, to me, is one of the most remarkable stories in the Torah, that the young Moses takes advice from his father-in-law. And what is that advice? It's to move forward collectively through cooperative participation. That it's not for you, Moses, alone to do the work. It's for you to have the capacity to empower others to do it with you. So the second quality of humility is to see the potential in others to make a difference, to share our own power so that power shared becomes power that's effective. That humility is the ability to see ourselves as part and not the focus of a larger system. That's the story of Moses at the beginning and the middle of his life. Moses at the end of his life remarkably seems deeply disappointed. Indeed, so much greatness, great people in history have often not reached their promised land. And in Parsha Ve'et Hanan, toward the second of the Parshiot in Devarim, the word Ve'et Hanan means, and he pleaded. And Moses in Parshat Devarim, in the 5th book, all of a sudden becomes a man of words. And what he says is, people, I pleaded with God that I should be able to go into the promised land. And God said no. And you know why, people, God said that I can't fulfill my dream? Because of you. Because of your unwillingness to go into the land when given the opportunity, and you're crying, and God got upset with you, and God got upset with me, and because of you, I don't get to go. That's what he says. And so you might think that at that point in his life, and he's 120 years old, you might think he just retires. He calls it, all right, God has now verified that God's not changing God's mind. I don't get to go, you go. But that's not what Moses does. With chapter after chapter, Moses mentors. And the opening mentorship of Moses is, you're going to get the taste of that promised land. And you're going to be successful in that promised land. And Moses says, and here's my caution, know that it's not because of you. It's not that you're so great that you're successful. It's because God gave you success because of the merit of your ancestors. That the land that you dwell in is not because you were strong. God did not choose you because you were great. God chose you because you're a small people, because of a relationship. And so people know that your successes are to be experienced with gratitude. When you bring your first fruits, you're to tell a little encapsulated story of the history of your ancestors, that they were a wandering people, and that it was God who brought you into this land of bounty. And more. Moses closes out the book of Devarim with Vizot HaBracha, and this is the blessing. That what might have been his own personal disappointment, to which he sacrificed much, he still remained the leader of the people, the mentor. And he blesses the people and guides them and says, this is how you will prosper, by leading a life of humility, by leading a life of loyalty, by leading a life of morality. For if you are immoral in that land, it will vomit you out. But if you are true to God and the covenant, God will bless you and you will thrive. Humility is like happiness. You can't define it directly. You can't have it directly. Happiness is a product of what we do, of how we live. It's a byproduct. The rabbis teach that anybody who claims that they're humble aren't, by virtue of having said that they're humble. They've already taken it out. But at the same time, if Moses is our moral exemplar for each of us, then that quality of anevut is what we are called when we hear the shofar to aspire to. As I noted earlier, the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah requires that the shofar be bent because we are to be able to bend before God, to acknowledge that the goodness in our lives is a product of our own deeds, but not only because of our deeds. Whatever successes we may have, whatever health we may have, whatever loved ones we may be in relationship with, all is a gift, and to be nurtured as a gift, to be experienced with gratitude. And so, as we hear the sound of the shofar through Musaf, I invite each of us to reflect on our own ability to do what is right, no matter what somebody does to you. Like Moses, to pray for Miriam, El na rafanallah, please God, heal her, please. I don't want to see her suffer, even though her leprosy was because of how she spoke against me. Like Moses, the ability to listen to others, even when they criticize what we're doing. The rabbis will build from the Torah and say, may we have a circumcised heart. The model for an inability to listen is Pharaoh. His heart is hardened. When Moses says, let my people go, so says God, what does Pharaoh say? I don't know that God. And 20 times in that story before the Exodus, it will say that Pharaoh's heart was hard. He could not listen. He could not hold on. He could not change. The ability to hear how we could be better is not necessarily an attack on us. When given compassionately, it's a guide. When we can open our hearts to hear how we can indeed live with our higher self rather than out of pettiness and fear and vulnerability. And last, to be able to live that way is ultimately to acknowledge that life has disappointments, for we always strive for more. That's how we grow. And the greater our goals, sometimes the greater our achievements and even our greatness. But when we don't necessarily get here, our lives are still rich and our loved ones are still worthy of our blessings. And so Moses teaches that our lives are to be lived as purveyors of blessing to those who we love, to be said explicitly and to be done by opening our hearts and listening when spoken to. For to listen to another, particularly of one who is close, and to genuinely hear it is the greatest of gifts. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, the mitzvah of shofar is to listen. When the shofar is blasted throughout Musaf, may we see ourselves as able to bend like the shape of the shofar, flexible and open. And what we hear is the sound of the possibility of rising higher, to be like Moshe Rabbeinu, a vessel of God's presence, emitting light of goodness. May we learn to be like him, anav, humble, willing to do what is right as an act of forgiveness, even when somebody to us has not acted rightly. Like Moses, may we listen even to family and more to a stranger. Mi chacham, who is wise, whom olomed mikol adam. It teaches in Pirkei Avot, Ben Zoma said, who is wise? The one who learns from every person. May we grow more wise in our listening and our learning. And may we be a source of blessing in how we live and in the words we speak. Amen.